How's it going, everyone? My name is Stephanie, and my co-presenter Andy here. We're going to be talking a little bit about how we've worked together in the past as UX researcher / designer and data scientist / analyst. All right, so there you go. So that's us, and we're here. So the main thing that we'll be going over today is thinking about how you use metrics, how you use KPIs in a complex way. So not just thinking about, oh, people are, buying our products and we want those numbers to go up and that's it. Or thinking about people are clicking on this button to sign up for our newsletter. We want that to happen more. We want to start thinking about the different things we're looking at interrelationally. So first, let's just do a quick intro to KPIs. I know everyone in the room probably kind of understands that, but just so that we're all on the same page. When we're talking about KPI, we're talking about, of course, a key performance indicator, but in particular, we're really talking about any sort of measurements of user behavior that you care about. So within every organization, you're going to set what your KPIs are. We can't tell you which ones are the ones, but those metrics can be qualitative or quantitative. The main thing you want to make sure is that you have a kind of standard of measure. You can repeat that measure over and over again, and you can compare what you've gotten in the present versus what you've gotten in the past. So as long as it's consistent and repeatable, you're good. So of course, we've got some examples up here. If you're familiar with the Net Promoter Score, conversion rates, sign-up rates, page views, click-through rates, all those sorts of things also count, as including, say, like add to cart if you're working in the e-commerce space, number of purchases. If you're particularly doing like a usability study, thinking about task completion rates within the different tasks that you have in your study, all of those different things you can quantify in some way, have some numbers, some representation, and then start digging deeper into it and start doing analysis. So those are the sort of things we'll be talking about today. So our story, to kind of set the stage for context before Randy starts talking about the analysis that he did. So let's just say we were working together with an e-commerce site. And so I was the UX researcher in this particular instance. And imagine any online retailer, say it's like Amazon or something like that, let's put it backwards, Nozama, I guess, in that case. And they are this new retailer, and they want to figure out how well is our site doing. And so they sell all different kinds of items, sell a little bit of everything. And there are a few main tasks that they care about that users can do on the site that they feel matter. And so people can go through and look at results in favorite items, like maybe something like a wish list or starring it or hearting, and be able to go through and say, hey, I like this. Then also the number of search results they get. So if I search for cats and I get all kinds of cat items, they're also looking at the quality, basically, of the results they get and the number of items on there. And then also if people read reviews or not. And then also, did they actually end up purchasing something? So as you imagine, it's like the usual add to cart rate. And so on our team, those are the sorts of metrics that we cared about. We cared about if people were favoriting items, what they were looking at, if they were reading more information about it, and purchasing. And the idea is that those three kind of behaviors of the first three were indicators of engagement. And so we focused on looking at those numbers, looking at percentages over time, comparing how many people were favoriting things in the past compared to now. We would compare that when there were any sort of redesigns that came up. And so the idea is that we were just looking at them all separately, saying we want those numbers to go up. That equals engagement. Engagement means that people will start purchasing things, and purchasing things will equal getting money. And so that's a very simple sort of viewpoint of kind of analysis of that. But then I started to think about, what do those metrics actually mean? If now I'm being asked to do research on a results page and asked to say, we need more people to favorite items. We want people to do that more, because when they're doing that more, they convert higher and they'll be more likely to buy. But at the same time, what do those actual metrics mean? If we're looking at these kind of three main behavioral metrics, what do they actually mean in relation to one another? Or do we just want numbers to go up and just more people favoriting, they get more results, they see more things, they buy more things? It's not that simple. And so I realized that there's a story involved. And if someone's coming onto your site, they're not thinking, I need to get those engagements. Let me add in my engagements metric. That's not how it works. They're going onto your site, they're searching for something. Then they're seeing, okay, what results do I get? Let me scroll through. Oh, I found what I wanted right away. And they favorite something. And then they look, and I'll look at it later. They keep on scrolling through. They favorite it. They like it. They keep going. And then at some point, they go look at what they favorited, choose something, and then actually buy it. So that's a whole story. But at the same time, that's one story. Now, let's say you have somebody else. They're searching through. They have 3,000 results, and they keep on scrolling. And they keep on going and going and going through the results and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling through. And it's only once they get to the last page that they find two things they like. They favorite them. They look at them a little bit more. Now they add them to their cart and purchase them. Those are the two. They're all the same, similar numbers. They got the same set of results. They favorited the same amount of things. They ended up purchasing them. They're two completely different stories. And one reveals a big problem. And so you can't just look at your numbers going up or down by themselves and say things are going well or not. And so the question then became for me is like, how do I actually go about doing that? How do I look at this data and tell a story? And how do I actually quantify it properly? So that's kind of where I started with. I thought about how we measure the story and how we could use data to kind of map out what I just described and actually start looking to actually distinguish stories and different patterns rather than just looking at numbers up or down. So now I'm going to hand it over to Randy. He's going to talk a little bit about how he went about doing this. So just for a little bit of kind of context and background, I do have a data analysis background, but not nearly as complex as the things that he'll be talking about. But when we kind of initially started working together, I basically went to him and said, I know there's complex analysis to get at how different factors and different behaviors relate to one another. I don't know how to do any of that. Please help me. And that's kind of how we started working together. So I'm going to hand it over to you to explain all the complicated stuff.
Hi. Okay, so my name's Randy, and like I said, I was handling the data science side of this. And so I work for a guy right now, and he has this idea that if you have a problem, that you should figure out the name for it, right? Because if you find the name for it, then you can go look it up. You can read tutorials, you can ask people, and you can have a conversation about it. So I'm going to use a few words to kind of guide that, but the purpose here is to make this accessible. It's not trying to speak over anybody's head. So we're going to talk about clustering, which is a data science approach. Show of hands, how many people have somebody that does data science work that is part of your team or that you can access for your work? Okay. Good. How many people have done anything that they might consider clustering or user segmentation? Okay, cool. This is good to know. Okay, so this is sort of the approach that we were thinking about. And in the past, that the company had done things like try to generate our own customer segments, right? Like men over 50, right? Women who like this. So we had kind of defined these things ourselves. But we were thinking about this idea that maybe we don't know what these segments are, and we have this new product on our site, this new recommendation engine that people are going to use, and that's going to allow us access to a level of detail and tracking that we haven't had before. We were using Google Analytics, and that kind of limited us to just kind of top-line aggregate information here, average users, total count of users, that kind of stuff. But now we're going to get information on what everyone does, and so let's try to figure out what those segments really are from our users. And instead of just these kind of categorical ideas of women or men or, in Chicago or in New York, this kind of stuff, let's try to come up with some KPIs and say, let's just divide them that way, right? And at the end of the day, clustering really is just this idea that we take, for example, just two dimensions, we'll call them, right? User behavior dimensions. Let's say like the number of clicks they make and the number of items that they ordered on an X and a Y axis here. Right? And we just look at this and we say, are there subgroups in there? And then we can say, we can apply some math and some statistical tools that we have, and we could essentially just try to pick center points and say, from this center point, these things are all similar, and from here, these are closest to over here, and so we can end up with roughly 3. And there's not an exact science to the number of groups that we make, but it's an approach that we can take. And we can imagine that this is with 2 behavior dimensions, like clicks and number of items they ordered, but we can imagine we add more in there. Right? And just like a room is a 3-dimensional space, right? We can have something this way, and then over here. Right? We can do the same thing, adding more and more dimensions of complexity to our users. So not just what do they click on? How far down do they scroll before they find what they clicked on, right? When they click on things, how often do they actually make that purchase? When they click on things, do they add it to like a wish list, or do they just click on it and kind of go on? And these all give us a better idea of our users. And so what we did is we found a way to measure them, and we ended up with 4 groups. And what I'm showing you here is average numbers for things. So the results view, it shows us the average number of items that those users were able to see. Favoriting, we see the average number of items that a user favorited in these different segments. And then we go down to, we can find out if they read the reviews and the total sample size that we had there. And what we can see is we have only one of these segments that has a purchase, right? And so this is the one that matters to us. And we notice just a few things off the bat, right? Like we think things like favoriting an item, if you're an e-commerce site, like that's great. So they're engaging with the product. But we found that the segment that had the highest rate of favoriting actually weren't our real converting users. Right, so if we try to optimize for this idea of a user that favorites a lot of things, or to maximize people that would favorite, we're actually not going to reach the users that are buying. Instead, we have this group that favorites a few things. They actually don't see as many items as everybody else. Right, and so there's a few things like they don't read as many reviews as everybody else, yet they're the most valuable users. So we took that, and Stephanie and I and some other folks in the company thought about this for a while, and then we said, this is really interesting. We did not expect this. And let's take another step. Let's go deeper. Let's take just this 5,000 in this sample size here, this group 4, and let's do this again and see, unpeel that 4. Right? And so here for A, B, C, and D. And now again, these are just our users that are converting. Right? And again, we can see in there, we can see different behaviors inside of them. We see some of them are looking at a few items, some are looking at a lot. And all of this comes together and is just one after another, these big aha moments. Right? Because before we would say to ourselves, okay, this is what our user looks like. We've talked to them on the phone. We've met them in person. We've had conversation with them. We can see some demographic information about them. And so we kind of guess about how they're going to behave, and we can extrapolate for those. But now we're actually seeing what is leading to those behaviors. And some of these things weren't what we thought was going to be the most impressive thing that would get them across the finish line to a conversion. Right? And so this allowed us to just rethink our KPIs. Right? What matters? We went in with these ideas that engagement matters, that favoriting matters, that adding to cart matters. And they do. But maximizing those doesn't actually turn into your final result. And then going back to my boss now that loves to find the proper name for things, right? There's one of my favorite ideas in economics is this paradox. It's called the Simpson Paradox, and it's great. So the idea is that if you have a population, right, like this room, and this side over here, if I do something, let's say I tell a joke, this side over here laughs hysterically. This side over here hates the joke. Right? Yeah, sort of like that. Okay, so if that happens, and if I were sort of measuring the sentiment of the room, how well did the joke go over, right? I would get this sort of flat line, right? But if I actually saw through and saw there's 2 distinct groups, I would see, well, this group reacted strongly, and this group reacted negatively. And so if I can take that insight and see something about this group and that group, it gives me a deeper understanding of my users. And we didn't have that before. And Stephanie can talk more about what that led the company to do.
Thank you so much for that explanation. There's no way I could have explained a lot of that complex analysis, but definitely I remember when we were working together initially on it, it was so helpful first of all, to hear that this sort of analysis could be done, but really it does open up a whole nother way of looking at metrics. And one thing that it did do for the team that we were working on at the time was really kind of give us a better understanding of what our users were actually doing. We weren't just thinking in terms of, let's get these numbers up or down, let's have them favorite more, just like Randy was saying. Like, let's think about who's favoriting and why. And also think about, like, what that actually looks like in a given session, what that actually looks like for a particular user. And so in that, we also kind of got an alternative to a persona. Now that we kind of have these clusters that we can look at, instead of depending on demographics and ideas that we kind of think is how people behave, are how people behave, we now have these clusters, this data based on behavior to say, here's this group 4A that tends to want to, actually, let's go back. Now we have this group 4A that tends to maybe not necessarily get a lot of results in their view. That might be a lot of different things. Maybe it depends on if the site offers a lot of what they want, or maybe they really narrow down their search results and search appropriately so that they don't have a lot of results. They're not trying to go through and favorite anything. That's not really their focus. They're looking at reviews. They're trying to get a sense of what information is there. They don't want to look at a ton of them, and then they buy something. That's one story. That's one persona alternative, I should say. But then you also, at the other end of it, have, let's see, this group that likes to look at everything. People who, when they get results, they want to search broadly. They want to be the one doing the work. They don't pick filters or anything like that. I want to look through tons of results, look through each one. I'm going to go through the ones I think are interesting. I'm going to read as many reviews as possible and get down a rabbit hole of reviews and start looking at 20 of them, and then I will buy something. Those are two different sets of people, and instead of thinking maybe those people are there, this is one way to have data to just get us there. Instead of me having to go through and watch, say, recorded sessions in full story or run user testing sessions, I was able to have this data based on actual sessions on the site. So it really does help to also take away, those sort of experimental factors that affect the external validity of your results you get. Now you're basing it on actual sessions and being able to draw similar kinds of conclusions and then be able to use that as a foundation for moving forward with testing. And then also from there, we're thinking about a way to prioritize for our team. So if we're now thinking about people being able to favorite, now we're thinking, do we want to prioritize work that helps to improve that favoriting experience, or are we going to now prioritize in a different way? It helped us to actually change kind of what we had coming up on our roadmap and what we had coming up in our backlog of things to work on, and now reprioritize based on a better understanding of what our users were actually doing and kind of change tack a little bit. So it actually had an impact on our team's work. Now I'm going to kind of introduce the takeaways and let Randy talk a little bit about some of the pros and cons. But kind of our overall recommendation is that you work with your analytics team, work with whatever analytics resources you have to try and do some of this work and explore complex relationships between metrics, not just up or down. There was a little bit mentioning kind of ratios. Instead of communicating to stakeholders, 50% of people are favoriting. It's like, well, here's this ratio of, for every 100 results, you have 20 favorites. Like, that tells you a little bit more, that's a little bit richer, and you can actually kind of explore that a bit more. But I'm going to let Randy talk a little bit more about pros and cons for this method.
So one thing I want you guys to take away from this as you think about how this applies to you is maybe this methodology doesn't specifically apply to you, but I'd like to help work on that conversation with an analytics team, right? Because from my seat in the company, I had an idea about how we could do analysis like this, but the value of this, or what we were trying to solve, I needed the conversation with Stephanie in order to understand. And I've talked to other friends of mine who work in the data science space, and you think about this motivation for agile design, right? Agile product development. One of the key things that gets talked about is engineers don't like building things that never ships, and they don't like building things that nobody wants to use, right? And data science has that same issue. The reason that they're not in academia is because they want to do research that's helpful, but we often don't know. We're not talking to the users as much, and we're not as involved in really the business context. And so the conversation that Stephanie and I had and the product team and I had help kind of break that down, and we can say, oh, here's tools that we have, and we can answer that question. So the pros about this approach, about thinking deeper about KPIs and this relationship in general, is we can help you, the user researchers, add some more scientific facts to back up the other qualitative research that you're doing. Right? We can give you more in order to help make that case to your stakeholders that you're on the right path. And we can give you deeper context about what's going on. We don't look at metrics in isolation. We don't look at just this one statistic that we get from Google Analytics or from our site dashboard. We think about them deeper. And we're able to combine some different methods, the qualitative and the quantitative together, and come up with something that's better. And one doesn't beat the other, but it's a conversation together, and combined with each other, we have better solutions. Cons, a few of them. It takes time. It takes time in part because sometimes your data science team, like me, doesn't quite understand what we're trying to solve. You tell me you want to do a clustering problem. I said, cool, I can work on that. That's fun. Wait, what do we want to cluster? Okay, and so Stephanie and our product managers, they work through, like, this is why we need to do it, and this is what's important, and focus on this business problem. And over time, the reporting can get automated and the processing can get automated. This feeds and allows this qualitative teamwork to work better. Comprehension is a challenge, right? And it's a two-way street, right? It's the job of me and the burden of me as your data science teammate to help you understand what this tool can provide. And then it's the burden of the people closer to the business and the user to help explain the problem that you need solved. And so we can work together to do that. Stephanie?
Yeah. Cool. So what we'd like to ask you all to do, I'm thinking if we have time, is to really think about, like, how you would go about doing something like this on your own teams. Not expecting you to have your data science team sitting right next to you right now and figure this all out, but how you would actually start that conversation. Like, when I initially went to Randy, I had an idea. I went with the initial problem. I had my Jira ticket. I was told research favoriting. We want more people to favorite. Figure this out. Figure out what we need to do to get people to favorite more, because they convert higher.
Yeah.
And so I was like, let's look at this differently. And I went to Randy and it's like, here are the things we care about. We care about that favoriting. We care about people buying things. And here are a few other measures that we have. What can we do with this information? And we talk through, like, what specific things we'd actually measure. So when you think about, say, like, operationalizing a variable, it's that same sort of thing. We care about the quality of the results people have. And so we decided to particularly measure the number of results they were getting and if they're actually going in and looking at more information.
So we brought you an exercise.
So, there.
This is fun. Okay.
Yes.
So you're welcome.
Yes.
Okay.
So, yeah.
We'd
So
like
do what I said.
we'd like everybody at the tables to pick one of two companies, Twitter or Instagram, and we'd like everybody to spend a minute or so at the table thinking about 3 different dimensions, behavior dimensions that we could measure people if we were trying to conduct research to better understand our users as either Instagram or Twitter. And then what we're going to do is we're going to hear from a few of you to share back, and we can kind of talk through together. And this thinking exercise is sort of what we wanted to share with you. So again, we'll think about Twitter and Instagram, and everybody at the table is just take about 60 seconds to think together about 3 different dimensions that we could measure user behavior and why we would choose those to understand our users.
Yeah, we figured this will kind of help you start also thinking about the questions you might have for us at the end. We'll see if we have time. We'll try.
So about
You think we can wrap it up in 3:20?
All right, about 15, 20 seconds, and then we'll call on some volunteers to go over this with us.
So we're going to give you guys about like 30 more.
No, we're going to do it now.
We're going to do it now? Okay. So sorry, unfortunately, we want to make sure we end things on time. We only have a few minutes. So what we'd like to do now is see if we can have one volunteer first from the group to kind of share what you guys ended up talking about.
Someone over here. Someone over here want to share something. Yes? You're pointing. That's great. Yes. That's fantastic. We have a volunteer. Well, she volunteered you. This is amazing. Can a microphone go over to that table? Oh, look. 2 people are volunteering you. You have friends.
We'll be here after the talk too. But
okay, so hi, your name?
Kat.
Kat, hi. So first, can you tell us if you chose Instagram or Twitter to think about?
Instagram.
Cool. And what 3 user behaviors did you think about measuring?
We were thinking of like the usual ones, likes, comments, and then also like video viewing.
Oh, cool. Okay. And what do you think you might reveal if you started pulling people out that way?
Yeah, well, I think especially with videos, you could see the difference of like how long people are watching video and if they're liking or commenting, or if people like, do they also comment, rates like that.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. And one thing that we did, kind of thinking about this too, like how long you do a thing, is when we were doing our clustering, we wanted to make a bigger difference between somebody who didn't do anything and somebody who did that action once, and make a smaller distance between somebody who did something like 100 times and 101 times. Because what we really want to do is separate people who were taking some action, even those little steps, and really pull those out. Let's go over to this side of the room. Can we get somebody to volunteer and talk about what they were thinking about?
Yeah.
Or volunteer somebody at your table. Yes. Hi.
Awesome.
Can we have a mic over here? Thank you. Hi, what's your name? Elka. Elka? Hi. She's bringing you a microphone. I can hear you, but they can't. Hi.
So our team is talking about Twitter.
Yeah.
So I'm actually a data scientist, and I have been working with Twitter analytics. So there's
Heck
a bunch.
Okay.
There's a bunch of engagement data you can get from Twitter analytics, including the tweets and also the view, the reach, the impressions, and also the number of comments and share. But we're also thinking about another dimension is the tweets itself. We can do text analysis on that, and that these are basically the 2 dimensions we're thinking about. But I think it's very traditional data scientist thinking. I hope like user researchers can have more interesting insights in that.
Yeah. So definitely.
Well, we had another, because we wanted also to touch on Instagram, so we also think about getting something that is unconventional, like a number of people who have double profiles, one profile for them, another profile for their pet.
Interesting. Yeah, I've seen that a lot. I don't have one for my cat, but it would be good if it was.
There's a lot of people having.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so sorry, unfortunately we're out of time, and definitely wish we'd have a bit more time to talk with you all and have questions, but we will be here afterwards. But thank you all so much.
Yes.
We definitely appreciate this, and hopefully it'll give you all some food for thought. But sorry, we can't take questions right now, but there's our contact information if you want to reach out to us and ask any other questions you have. But yeah, thank you all so much.
Yeah, and we're sitting over there.
Yeah, we're sitting
So
there.
come
We'll
say
be
hi.
here. Yeah.